Welcome back! We're all still wasting away here in Coronaville, but hey, we're pumping out new products until stuff gets back to normal. For instance, the new Gktech Z33 350z V35 G35 solid rear subframe bushings. This is a doozy, so keep your pantyhose on. This is the box. Look at it go. And this is all the cool stuff you get inside, starting with the front bushings, as shown amazingly on the diagram in the top right. Moving right along to the rears. Look how beefy those are. These are the thin, large shims that will go on all four corners if need be. These are the thick, large shims that will go on the front only. These are the smaller, thick shims that go on the front only. And finally, the smaller, thin shims that go on the rear. But I'll go over all of those in more detail soon. Start by removing both wheels unless you want to make this a challenge. Then remove the lower coilover bolt. Then, doing the same on the other side, let the suspension fully droop on down. Now remove the left-hand rear caliper bolts and then hang the caliper properly on the chassis. Move on to the right side, remove those bolts and hang that bad boy up as well. Octo yourself underneath the car and remove the lower brace by removing all the bolts as shown here by our beautiful hand model, Zach. Once that's out of the way, head over to the exhaust and remove the rear nuts. A little back further and up, you'll see a bolt. No, not that one. That one. It goes to the exhaust hanger on the subframe. Remove it, then move up a little bit more and remove the other exhaust hanger bolt from the subframe as shown. Now, pop on up and remove the mid-flange exhaust nuts and then pop the exhaust off like it was that easy. Now head back up and remove the drive shaft. So slap a wrench on one side to hold the bolts, loosen and remove as shown here. Now that that is gone, you can remove the e-brake cable nuts, so zap those off post haste, then drop those cables down like it was hot and remove the cables from the bracket itself. Now, gingerly remove the cables from the heat shield as shown here. Let them dangle and support the diff from below. Now, remove the two left-hand front subframe brace bolts, then move to the left-hand rear and remove the nut. Then back to the two right-hand front subframe brace bolts, removing them, and then to the rear to remove that nut as well. Loosen and remove the subframe chassis brace bolts shown here that are in between the two studs. Move on to removing the right-hand rear subframe brace nut, then the left-hand rear one. Now get that skinny boy out of the way for now. Now drop the subframe down or lift the car up depending on how baller a setup you have. Moving right along to bushing removal techniques, method 1 and my favorite, fire! Apply accelerant, ignite, and watch burn. Fire is dangerous, so it's probably best you go with method 2 and cut the damn things out. Same process as the S chassis ones, aka pain in the ass. Just get rid of the center bushing by either sawzalling it off, punching it out, and or drilling it out with a big ass hole saw. The choice is yours, young Padawan. Once the center section is free to meet its maker, grab the old hacksaw and cut it till it's weak, then bash the sucker out until the shell is gone forever. Get your sand and clean on to get it looking fresh, then press all four bushings into their appropriate places. Peep the start of the vid if you forgot what goes where. Anyway, once they're all nice and flush, pop the subframe back into the car, lift it up, and keep it supported. Here's where you got options, son. If you want 10 wholesome millimeters of subframe riser action, then put the thick small shim up front on the bottom and the two thin small spacers on the bottom and the rear. Say you don't want that in your life and you decide you want a bit less, say 5 millimeters. Pop the large thin shim up top in the front as well as in the rear. Put the thin small shims on the bottom in the front and rear, and abracadabra, your subframe has been risen 5 millimeters. Say you're now feeling a bit emo and you decide you don't want either of those and you need stock height. Pop the larger thick bushing up front, then stack the two large thin bushings at the top and the rear, and finish installing the subframe. Once it's bottomed out, slide that little skinny boy from earlier, the subframe brace, back over the top and install the right hand rear nut, then the two bolts in the middle, then the left hand nut. Now tighten the two outside nuts first, crisscross style. Then tighten and torque the middle bolts to 45 to 52 Newton meters, aka 34 to 38 foot-pounds, and pop on the right-hand subframe brace. Install the two bolts, then the nut at the rear, and then zap those suckers down and torque them to 40 to 45 Newton meters, or 30 to 36 foot-pounds. Move on to that rear nut and torque that thing down to 100 to 120 Newton meters, or 74 to 88 foot-pounds. Repeat this exact process for the left-hand subframe brace, ensuring that you tighten and torque the bolts and nut to the same specs that were shown on the screen just a few moments ago. Now, head back to that skinny boy brace and tighten and torque the outside nuts down to 100 to 120 Newton meters, or 74 to 88 foot-pounds as well. Now put on your pants backwards like crisscross and crisscross pattern torque all the mounts again to the same torque specs shown on the screen. Whip the e-brake lines back up into their respective places, reconnect the ends to the bracket, and slide the cables on up, then throw those nuts back on, torquing them to the specs shown on the screen. Next, install the drive shaft bolts. Once all in, torque them down to these specs. Torque, rotate, torque, rotate. Go over them twice just to be sure. Get it? Got it? Good. Now unhang your right hand rear caliper, pop it on the rotor, thread in the bolts, then torque them to these specs right here. Rinse and repeat for the other side, hitting those same torque specs as well. Now install the exhaust by slipping it into the flanged studs, then install the rear hanger bolt that goes into the subframe, then move on to the other bolt that's held into the subframe, tighten those on up, then tighten the mid-flange nuts on the exhaust. Now head to the rear with the gear, tighten up the rear flange nuts as well. Install the lower brace by tightening up these 3 bolts as shown here, then doing the same to the other side. Now zap down the middle bolts and torque the middle bolts to these specs shown conveniently on the screen. Now lift the suspension assembly up and install the lower coilover bolt and torque down to these settings. Do the exact same thing for the other side, again, not forgetting to get your torque on. Now toss your wheels back on, torque those suckers to spec, and that's it, you're done! Way to go, mate. This is John and I. We have YouTube channels. Please subscribe. If you can't install these, have a pro do it or reach out to us with any questions. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and I can't wait to see him drive his new car, Zach, with another Gktech how-to. Peace.